Who here is a business major? Who here is a not business major? What are you guys?
I'm a public relations major.
PR?
Political science.
Political science? Then there was some over here. Just shout them out.
Healthcare administration.
Okay.
Communication.
Okay. Anything else? So there's no nerds in the room. There's no computer science or engineering or... Man, come on, guys. No, just kidding. That's awesome. I was a nerd, so that's why I'm always curious if there's any computer science people in the room. So yeah, like Devereaux said, thank you for the introduction, by the way. I want to talk a little bit about Instructure, about essentially the story of how we got to where we are. And the reason I want to share that with you guys is because I think that there's a lot of value here and there's a lot of insight into how to build a company. A couple caveats though. One, I'm going to talk about the only thing I know, which is doing a tech startup and a venture-backed tech startup. That's what I know, that's what I was taught, and that's what I'm comfortable talking about. You could probably glean a lot from this, right? Depending on whatever it is you're looking at going to, whatever kind of company you're looking at doing. But that's what I know, and that's what I'm comfortable blabbing about. So that's what I'm going to blab at you about. The other caveat, I am very much a product guy. My concerns and my focus are always on the product and on the end user. And so I'm going to talk a lot about software and writing good software. Well, not a lot. I'm going to talk some about writing good software and the perspective and the information you need in order to do that. But this carries over to just about anything as well, right? Because no matter what it is, if you're selling something, you're selling a product. So I guess all I'm saying is you may have to extrapolate a little bit of information for what I'm going to say if you don't actually care about tech startups and you care about something completely different. But if it's super boring, feel free to just fall asleep. I won't be offended. And if you have questions anywhere along the way, feel free to raise your hand or just shout them out. So I already got my wonderful introduction. Co-founder of Instructure. My research in grad school at BYU was human-computer interaction. Essentially, that means the interactions that happen between humans and computers, right? So whenever people are using software or using technology, how do you make that intuitive and straightforward? Right now, my position at Instructure is the VP of Product, because like I said, that's what I love to do. And I tweet sometimes. So that's me and my wife and a golf ball. So I want to talk about, it's really interesting, the story of Instructure, I love telling it, and it's really fascinating because in some ways it really is broken out year by year, and that makes for a great way to tell the story and to talk about the development of a company and how we started with just two of us, me and Devlin Daly, with this idea of a product and a bunch of mock-ups, and how eventually we got to where we are today. Which is now in 2012, we have 118 customers using Canvas. That's 118 institutions. That is including schools like Auburn, Brown, Wharton, which is the business school at UPenn, and of course UVU, top of the list, right? So we're good to go. BYU doesn't use it. Don't get me started. If you want to know why BYU doesn't use it, you can come talk to me afterwards. I'm being recorded, so I can't vent, but anyway, we've had a lot of awesome stuff happen. So this picture in the corner, I'm going to show you this video in a little while. We do t-shirts because we think it's fun. This picture in the corner, you guys know WebCT or Blackboard. That's what you were using before Canvas. This last summer, we actually crashed their users conference. It was a ton of fun. Their users conference was in Vegas. We found out where it was at, and we rented a bar just right at the main entrance to their conference. And one of the nights we opened it up and said, anybody can come join us unless you're a Blackboard employee. And we got a ton of people coming in. It was a lot of great fun and tons of great attention, which was great. A lot of ways in this market, in the learning management system market, which is what our product is called, we are the belle of the ball. We are the ones that are driving innovation and making things happen. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But that's the story. That's what I want to get you guys to understand. So it all started in 2008. Me and Devlin, we were grad students at BYU. My research was usability. His was security. We ended up taking a class together from the dude in the middle, whose name is Josh Coates. He was the founder of Mozy and also Scale 8. He sold Mozy for a good chunk of change. And after that, he went and bought a tank and restored it because he was bored. But so he taught this class on the side because he was bored and wanted to do some fun stuff. And the class was super eclectic, right? I mean, this guy has a very dynamic personality, very engaging and very fun, very opinionated. But this is some of the material that we covered in the class. You have Charlie the Unicorn, you have Band of Brothers, you have Ali G. If you've been to BYU, you can notice that this is not typical BYU course material, which was great. I mean, some of the kids in the class super squirmy, right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, he just said the D word, right? But it was fun. Very educational. And the premise of the class essentially was pretend you're doing a tech startup. So do your market research, put together a pitch, put together your financial model to back up their slides and to show when you say it's up and to the right, that actually means something. Do all of that, and then at the end of the semester, we're going to go ahead and bring in an angel investor. And you're all going to pitch to him, and he's going to tell you you suck. But he'll tell you that some of you suck less than other ones, and it'll be great, and it'll be really useful. So it was a lot of fun. We dominated the class, the pitch. We were the only one. There were two that anybody said was worth anything, and we were the one that people actually were impressed with. And the reason for that was because we took it seriously, and we weren't just doing this academic exercise, right? As we dug in, we did this for real, and we decided we wanted to do it. Our initial idea when we started was actually library systems, and that died really quickly because those are even worse than LMSs. But when we really started talking about it and trying to figure out what we wanted to do and what we wanted our startup to be, Devlin remembered some advice from Paul Graham, who probably some of you have heard of. And the advice was, if you want to do a tech startup, think of the most broken piece of software you know about, and there's probably an opportunity there. So we looked at each other for about half a second and said Blackboard. And that was what we started. We started looking at that and saying, how can we make a Blackboard killer? What does the market look like? What is the opportunity here? What are the other players in the market? Because part of us kind of just assumed BYU was on Blackboard Learn. Part of us just assumed BYU made a horrible choice, right? They picked the most grody piece of software out there, and there was some other, shining icon that they were just ignoring for some reason. But as we dug in and as we looked at the space and everything that was going on, we realized that nobody was doing anything, right? This was a fat and happy market. Everybody was just chilling where they were at. There had been no innovation in the last 5 years, and that's like no innovation, right? Not even trying to catch up. We were looking in our classes at where things should be and where they could be, in the latest and greatest technology. And so there's this 10-year gap, and we realized that there was a market opportunity for somebody to step in and really drive this and really make things happen. So that was what we decided to do. We decided we could run with it. So this is an amazing picture. We thought we were legit because we had a little banner, right, at this conference. Actually, this conference was here at UVU. This was our first conference that we went to. It was called TTIX. A lot of fun, really great, really educational. But we decided that we were going to go for it. We came up with the name Instructure, which is an instructional infrastructure. Take the two words and mush them together. That's where that came from. And our initial logo was that little pencil. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. But what we did, this is where hopefully we'll start to get into some information that will be useful for you guys. Rather than just saying, we know that LMSs, the Blackboard sucks, and we think we can build a better one, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Rather than just writing a bunch of software and then throwing it at the world, we said what we really need to know is what are the pain points that our potential customers care about? What are the things that they need to have? What are the opportunities that are out there that we can take advantage of? Because we don't know the market. Right? We've never bought an LMS, and we have never been on a committee to decide which LMS to use for an institution. And so rather than just write code and then try to sell it, before we wrote any code at all, we went on what we call the product validation tour. So we ended up talking to 17 institutions that first summer in 2008. We would call them up on the phone. We would say, hey, we're Instructure. We're building the next generation of LMS. We would love your feedback and help in building it. Do you have time to talk to us? And we were talking to the CTO, right, or the CIO, or we were all the way up the chain. And we would say, we want to talk. And they would say, awesome, we would love for you to come in, which I think says more to their desperation about their current situation than it did to our sales skills. But we took it, right? And it was great. I mean, we ended up doing a couple different loops through California and Nevada, and we talked to each of these guys for at least 2 hours, right? And I'll show you, I'm actually going to show you the slides, a bunch of the slides that we pitched to them, because I think they're really useful and educational. But this was the feedback that we got by the end from all of these schools. this was what they said after we showed them the product and we said, what do you like and what don't you like, and let's try to understand where you're coming from. And it was just this enormously positive, just this gush of response from these institutions, which then validated what we thought, that there was an opportunity here, that we had nailed it, that the changes that we were proposing were the right changes, and this was the information that we took back and used to raise money, right, and to help get the company started. So I want to show you, like I said, what those slides all were, and I'll talk about why I think they're important. But first, does anybody have any questions so far? Yeah.
Did you make it to run all modern OSs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and remember at this point, like, there was nothing, right? This is vaporware still. So when we pitched, of course, we said, like, oh, it'll run on all the latest technology and everything, but it still does. Any other questions? Okay. So, like I said, our initial logo was the pencil, and Instructure was the name of the company. Our color scheme, we've changed the color scheme since then. I showed you at the beginning we had our little logo. The reason for that is because red and yellow are really hard colors to work with on the internet. Coming up with a style and a theme is just really rough. So we ended up changing that, and the feedback we got was the pencil looked K-12-ish, it looked very youngish, so we want to do something different. But it worked really well for starters. So we would come to these schools, we would sit down. Usually there were about 4 or 5 people on the other side of the table, and we would try to prep for that, right? We would say, hey, we want to talk to you, we want to talk to your whole team, and we want to get your feedback, and we want to understand everything about this process. And this is the part that I think really generalizes well, right? Whether we're talking about online backup, or if you're talking about an email client, or if you were talking about projectors to sell to the classrooms, right? In all of those cases, what you want to do is sit down with the people that buy and implement and try to understand what are the pain points, where are they coming from, what's important to them. Because this is your chance to get to know the market better than anybody else. Your competitors aren't going to be doing that, right? They've already built a product, they're already selling it, they're just focused on how can we get this thing out the door. And so this is your opportunity while you're still greenfield and trying to figure things out to say, what is the optimal solution? What is the solution I can come up with that is better than anything else out there? And you can be confident after you've gone to enough people that you have that solution, because they'll start to validate it for you and they'll say, yeah, that's exactly right, that's what we need. So you have to keep going and keep talking until you get there. I think a lot of people forget about this step of validating before they go forward, just because it's hard, right? And you're going to get a lot of cold water, and you're getting a lot of people saying, this is dumb and this is stupid, or I don't understand. But this upfront work is really what sets apart, in a lot of ways, really successful startups from those that just fizzle out because they had a cool idea and didn't bother to validate it and didn't bother to run it by anybody. So it was like a little soapbox or something that I just got on, so I'll get back off now and go back to this. So we would say, we're going to talk a little bit about us, a little bit about you. We'd love to get your feedback. We'd love a tour of your facilities. And the tour is always great if you can do that, because it gives you a little more time to talk afterwards when you're not like selling them and pitching at them and try to understand where they're coming from. So then we would say, this is who we are. We were founded in March of 2008. Headquarters are in Provo, Utah. There's 6 employees. It's totally fudged. There was 2 of us and our wives and the guy that did our logo, right? But for some reason, you feel way better saying 6 than you do 2, even though, as far as the other people are concerned, whatever, right? You could say 10 or 20, and it doesn't really mean a whole lot to them. And then we'd say self-funded. Advisory board is something that we always made sure to do. This is just to say, hey, there are other people out there in the world who have heard what we're talking about and agree that it's not a stupid idea. So this is why you should listen to us. Because you as a budding entrepreneur have no clout, right? You can't go in and say, oh, I know everything, and I've done 7 startups before, and I know exactly what you guys want to accomplish. Maybe you have some kind of domain-specific knowledge, but even still, it's great if you can find other people who have more domain-specific experience that can help validate. So we would say, look, we're here because we think education is hard enough without technology getting in the way. We want to build a better learning management system, and we want your help in designing it. Then we would jump into these pain points. When we first started pitching to schools, we just made these up, right? I mean, we'd been TAs, we'd been students, we had a pretty good idea of what the frustrations people would have with this technology were. And so we wrote up an initial 8 pain points. But this changed after every presentation, because we would come to these groups and we would say, which of these really resonate with you? Or is there one that isn't on this list that you think is important? And they would say, yeah, you know, number 3, we totally feel that every day. It's such a struggle for us. And number 7, we don't actually customize the LMS at all, so we don't really care about that. And that helped us to know and to sort of modify these pain points as we went to where at the end, we had these 8 pain points that we knew resonated with almost everybody. So this was great information. By the way, when we would go out and do these pitches to schools, Devlin would do almost all of the talking, and I would take notes. I would sit on my computer and just type like crazy. We ended up with about 300 pages of notes after talking to 17 schools, and that's the juicy stuff, right? I mean, that's a lot of great data that we got. And so make sure you have somebody as you're going out and talking to people who's writing it down. Some people like to record the presentations. People are different when they're being recorded than when they're not being recorded, I think. So I tend to prefer just writing it down, because I think you can still get the information you need. People feel less intimidated and they're more comfortable saying. Because you're going to ask questions like, would you buy this? And if they're on the record, or they feel like they're on the record, then they might say, oh, I don't know. Whereas if they're not, then they'll say, well, heck yes. If it existed right today, then definitely I would. So you need to try to get that candid feedback, which is why we wrote stuff down instead of recording it. But next, we would say this is what we do. We're a completely hosted solution, focused on usability. We want to be directly involved in support and training. We'll have an open API, built-in assessment tools, and baseline for non-technical with options for power users. If you're going into the software space, I think this bottom one is super important. And I've spent a lot of time researching and looking into this and thinking about this, because what you need to understand is what are the most common use cases? What do people want to do? Because what we tend to do when we build products or when we build software is we say, I have a thing, right? This is a thing for you, and I want to give it to you. And it's not, we don't necessarily position it as a solution to a problem or as a remediation for a pain point. And that's really what you need to try to understand, right? That's what those 8 pain points are for. Because then you take those and say, oh, I understand why they're frustrated. Let's make sure that the product actually does that. And it does that first of all. And so those are the things you can focus on. So your baseline, this is the common use case. This is the thing that 90% or 80% of people are going to do when they first log in, or when they first pick up your product, or when they first walk through the door, right? You need to know what that is, what you want that to be, and how you can make that happen. Dead simple. If you need customization and you have power users that want to do crazy stuff, sure, set it just to the side, right? I mean, make it available and easy to get to, but don't you dare let it get in the way of that golden path or that common use case. So now I want to show you guys some of the slides. Like I said, we mocked up a product in PowerPoint. I want to show you what that actually means, because I think people don't realize how serious we were about this. We mocked up what we thought a learning management system should do in PowerPoint. So we said one of the use cases, one of the things that people want to do often is create a class as an instructor. So let's go ahead and do that. So here at the welcome screen, you can click, I want to go ahead and set up. I mean, these are all separate slides to the click level, right? We would say, so then you click on this, and then this is the page that shows up, and we talk about, you can import things from previous semesters, or you can go ahead and start from scratch. There's this wizard here along the top. They can jump anywhere inside of the wizard at any time if they want to. So they go ahead and pick that, click continue, and move on. Right? I mean, these were detailed interactions that we were mocking up inside of PowerPoint. And the reason we did that is because people, there's these barriers in people's minds, right? And you need to make what you're pitching to them real enough that they'll get past one of those initial barriers, which is engagement. If you're just talking high level and you're like, we want to build an LMS that lets you be open and communicative. Do you agree with that? And they'll be like, well, yeah, of course I do. But that doesn't actually give you very much information. If you show examples like this, then they start to think about it, and the gears spin, and they say, oh, this if I was on this page, this is what I think it would do, and this is what I would want it to do. And then they'll ask questions. Does it do that? Like they'll say, oh, can I just click on one of these things, and does that take me to a separate page or does it interact in line? And we'd say, oh, well, look, you click and it brings up a little dialogue right there. And you can go ahead and fill it out and update it. These are kind of these are some of the grading options that you would have as an instructor. You can easily add things right here from this page. You know, so they get past one of those initial barriers, and you start to have a different conversation than you would when you're just high level what ifing. So we would walk through this whole scenario. We would say, look, you know, you can click to pop up these dialogues. You can drag and drop. It was amazing how many people freaked out about that because it was sad to us because we're like, oh my gosh, like everyone should have drag and drop now. It's not that difficult, but they just gushed over it because they didn't have it and they were desperate for it. So that was good information. Lot of great info. Just each of these pages we would stop at and say, you know, this is what we're trying to accomplish here. You know, we get to learning outcomes and we'd say, what are you guys trying to do for learning outcomes? I'm sure none of you would actually know what that means, which is fine. But we would say, you know, what's your goal with your outcome strategy? What are you trying to align? How do you typically do it? And we would try to dig in and understand where they're coming from, because this is our chance to get to know our users in a way that we wouldn't be able to otherwise. So we would just mock up what we thought it looked like, why it was valuable, and we'd show them. That's what we do. Then we would say, that was one mock-up. You know, that was one little walkthrough we put together. We've built all of these other ones as well. So this was not just like a half hour of work, right, putting together this presentation. This was about 2 weeks of full-time effort, putting all of these together and iterating on it before we even talked to anybody. Yeah?
What did you use to design it? I mean, I guess my question is, I hear people come here and say, we design mock-ups. Are you programming a mock-up, or is it just using like Designer or like Photoshop and creating like a, I'm sorry if that's a question I'm not answering, it's fine.
No, check it out. So these mock-ups, these ones are just, it's PowerPoint, right? I mean, it's a lot of little images and tables and things.
Okay.
We would just build it in PowerPoint, right? So that was the easiest way for us to mess with it. Some people will build prototypes, like they'll actually write code. The problem with that is once you've written code, you're kind of married to it. And it's hard to change, even if it's a prototype. With PowerPoint, right, there's no sense of like, this is sacred. You just grab stuff, throw it out, and put other stuff on, and it's really great. There's other tools you could use now that we didn't have then, like Balsamiq, for example, is a great mock-up tool that you could use. But this worked really well for us. And I ended up like a PowerPoint Java Jedi Master by the end of this, because there was a ton of stuff. Like this little progress bar on the bottom, I don't know if you noticed that. I was so proud of that. That took a lot of work to get that, so it would like auto move as I was going through the presentation. It was awesome. Any other questions? Okay, so yeah, we would jump. We had all of these. Like I said, 2 weeks of full-time mocking up, and this was me and Devlin sitting down and saying, what do we want this to look like? You know, based on what we understand, what should we do for a first pass? And these changed, right? These mock-ups changed after every presentation that we had. We started to converge on what the right answer was, but when we first started, they were very different from this. And we would present part of it, and people would say, I don't even know what you're talking about. So then we would stop and say, okay, this is what we were trying to get at. And they're like, oh, we don't use that vocabulary. We talk about it like this. And everybody sets it up like this. And we say, okay, that's great. You know, so then we would sit down after we left the school in Devlin's, there was a picture of Geo Metro before. Devlin's Geo Metro with no air conditioning, driving through Nevada. It was freaking awesome. So we would, you know, change things really fast because it was hot. But we would iterate on this thing. It was very much a living presentation and would change as we went, which was a lot of the value, because we started to understand exactly what needed to happen. We started to get to know the vocabulary that our customers cared about, and we started to know as we went that we were converging on that right solution. Then we would have this exercise. This is really useful, at least it was for us. We would say, look, an LMS has a ton of junk in it. This is, we think, all of the stuff that would go into a standard learning management system. Do you agree? You know, is there stuff on here that you think isn't necessary, or is there stuff that we haven't written that you think is a must-have for just a standard LMS? And they would say, you know, this looks pretty comprehensive to me. We would say, awesome. We are a startup. We are a tech startup with limited resources. We cannot do all of this at once, right? So we want your help now in trying to understand what would be a viable version 1.0. If you ever get into the product space at all, there's this term minimum viable product that gets used a lot. And the reason that people use that minimum viable product, it kind of speaks for itself, right? The idea is what's the least amount of work I can put in to get something out the door. And the reason you want that is because there's two different styles of building products. One is to build everything up front, get to know what everybody wants and wishes and build it all in there and then release it to the world. And what typically happens when you do that is you have sad customers because you're late to deploy and the functionality isn't actually what they wanted because you didn't understand everything up front. And so what people try to do nowadays with this minimum viable product approach is they say, what's the bare bones that we can get out the door? And then we can iterate with our customers. We can say, okay, I have to have these things to start out. So let's get those. And then I'll talk to my customers as they're using it. And they're like, oh, the next thing we gotta have is group assignments. That's super important to us. And you start on the assignments this way, and I see where you're going, but it's actually wrong. Nobody does it that way. And so you get feedback sooner in the process, and you're able to iterate more and to enhance things faster than you would have if you waited until you had everything built and then threw it out the door 5 years later. Does that make sense? So we would have that negotiation with people. We would say, this is what we think a version 1.0 would look like. Do you agree? If this existed today, just these things based on the mock-ups that we showed you, would you, as an institution, switch to this? Is this something you would buy, pay money for, and it would be a viable thing for you? And they would say, you know what? No, because you don't have student organized groups, and we've got to have that. And we would say, okay, that's great, that you feel that way. Again, limited resources. So if we added student organized groups, what could we get rid of? Because we can't build it all, right? I mean, obviously the ideal solution would be all of the above, but we can't do that. So what could we get rid of? And they would say, oh, you know what? Like usage statistics, it's actually not important to us. We don't even check it ever. So go ahead and take that off. Or just-in-time file uploads. Nobody uses files at our institution, right? And so we would start to, through this negotiation, understand what are the must-haves, what are the nice-to-haves, and what are the nobody really cares about this, even though it shows up on all the checklists. So this was really great. And this was about, a fourth of the notes that I took had to do with these pages and getting to know what people needed and what were those urgent requirements. Any questions on that? Yeah?
How did you how were you able to go down and speak with these people, get the appointments to actually go talk to them?
We just call them. So we looked up, we visited the university websites, and we would look up the CTO, because that's public information, right? And we would just call their secretary, or we would call them directly and say, hey, we're building a next-gen LMS. And they would say, awesome. I mean, the thing is, it sounds crazy that could even happen, right? But people love to talk, they love to bat around ideas, and so if you can take the approach of you're not selling them a product, you don't even have a product, right? What you're doing is saying, I want your help in figuring out what you need. People are happy to help out with that because they want something better than what they've got. At least they should, or you're going to have a really hard time with your company in general. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Did you do all the pre-work basically before you went into these meetings? Like you had all these built kind of as a startup basis that you could go into the meetings with. Was that just from peer feedback, professors at BYU, whatever else that you just kind of came up with?
Yeah, so you bootstrap it, right? The first time you just do it in your head, and then you run it by your co-founder or whoever else is involved in the company, and then you run it by some teachers at the school that you know and that you trust, and you just kind of grow it from there, right? If you're going to do this right, you start with the easiest people and you save the hardest people for last. So like Berkeley was on that list, right? We didn't go straight to Berkeley and say, hey guys, we know what's up. Berkeley is involved in, it's called Sakai. It's this separate project where they're essentially building their own LMS. So they know a ton. They have a lot of great input, and they're Berkeley, so they think they're all in a bag of chips too. So we didn't start with those guys, right? We saved that until we were more comfortable with our presentation. I mean, you'll hear the same thing when you talk to people about pitching to VCs, right? They say don't start with the VCs that you want to get money from. Start with your parents, and then start with somebody you know that has a little money, and then talk to some angels, and then after you've got your pitch all ironed out, then take it to the VCs. So it's a very similar thing. roadmap. This was completely made up. We would say this was a way to say we are thinking ahead, right? We're not just making this up as we go, but we're planning out what we think we can do in a reasonable amount of time. And then we would ask, is this the right schedule? Do you think that adaptive course content should be in version 1.0, or do you think assessment tools could wait longer? And just try to understand a little bit about the schedule going forward. This is important because it helps people understand and recognize that you're going to be a living, breathing company, right? And you're going to change over time, and you're going to grow over time. Because what people tend to do when they look at products is they say, there's this product as it exists right now, and there's this product as it exists right now. I want to compare those and decide which one I want. And part of the thing that really helps set apart a startup, because you don't have all of the features, right? If you just do component by component checkboxes, you're going to lose. And so part of the message that you need to come up with is, look at where we're going. This is where we're at. This is where they're at. Where are they headed, which is, down the tubes, and where are we headed, which is up and up. We get the future, and we know what needs to happen, and that's where we're going. So that's part of what you get out of this sort of a slide, is just that communication of, we have a plan, we have a trajectory, we know where we're going. Then we would ask a bajillion questions. These are numbers questions, right? But this is important because this is how you get to know the buying cycle and the customer base and what their situation is. So we'd ask how many students they have, how many courses they teach, what are they currently using, how much do they pay, when do they pay, how often do they pay, what's the title of the person who manages this system, how many employees does it take to maintain this thing? How long have you been on your current system? What did you use before that? What was it like switching from system to system? What kind of utilization do you have? Just a bunch of questions, right? Trying to understand everything we could about the market, because these are the ones where these are the things that your competitors probably know to some degree, but you need to get to know them too, and you need to start to understand what are the numbers, and how do I play the game, and how have people been selling to these guys in the past. So this is very useful information. We would say, is this something you would pay for? How much would you pay? This is a great question, this next one. How would you describe X to a colleague? This is the sanity check that you do at the end, right? Where you say, I just said a bunch of stuff to you. What did you get out of that? And most of the time we were fortunate, and what came back was what we expected. Every once in a while somebody would say, well, this is something completely different, and we'd say, oh my gosh, like, how did you get that? And try to dig in and understand where the disconnect was, and where our communication maybe broke down. And this is more about marketing than it is about anything else. And then we would say, is this a base hit, double, home run, or foul ball? When we went to Berkeley, we were actually in the room with two women, and they did not appreciate this analogy at all. They said, why are you using a sports analogy? Like, I don't know what a double is. And I thought, well, it's probably two of something, but I didn't say that, because that would be not nice. But we left it. I mean, they were like, you should use something academic. Like, you should say, is it an adjunct professor or a tenured professor? And I was like, is it a PhD? It doesn't have the same effect. So we just left it. Nobody else had a problem with it. But this is a good question, right? Because you want to know where you're at. Like, you say, this thing that we just showed you, if it existed, is this like the coolest thing you've ever seen? Is this pretty cool, or is this just about where everybody else is, right? Or is this completely off base? What do you think? Hopefully you never get the foul ball. If you do, you have a lot of work to do on changing your presentation. And then we want to keep being engaged, right? We want to keep communicating with you after the fact. We want to let you know about what we're doing and what's happening, and who else should we talk to. Ta-da! So that was our presentation. That was what we would show to schools. Like I said, we talked to about 17 of them. Got a ton of great data out of it. Any questions on that presentation? Yeah?
Those 17 schools, how many were signed up?
That's part of the story that I'm going to tell you in just a minute. Everybody always asks, and I'm always a little sad when they ask, because not as many as I would like, but there's a reason for that. So, yeah, another question over here I thought I saw.
I was going to ask pretty much the same thing.
Yeah?
Were they ever hesitant to tell you, like, numbers for what they were
Couple-
paying and what they're willing to pay?
A couple schools were nervous about the numbers thing. The fact that we weren't even selling anything helped out with that a lot, because we weren't saying, well, this is what we charge. We were just, what's the situation? Where are you at? And what is the pricing? And there's other avenues you can do to get that information. You should obviously go through couple different channels, not just trust that this is the source of all knowledge as far as pricing goes, but people are way more comfortable than you think they would be, especially if you're not recording them. So, any other questions? Cool. So, like I said, ton of great information. 2008, we took all this data that we got from all these schools and we just dumped it on some angels' desks and said, look, we know LMSs. We know this market better than anybody else that's here. We know exactly what needs to happen. This is our roadmap for the next 5 years. We put that together and actually it was pretty spot on. Like for the first 3 years, we stuck to that roadmap. And it worked out perfectly. We didn't intend to. Like I just actually looked at it a couple months ago, and I was like, oh, we really did stick to that. It was a good roadmap, and the reason was because the data was so good that we were building it off of. So we took that, and that was what we used to raise our initial round of investment. We hired a coder, got an office, had a lot of fun. My wife was extremely supportive. She actually really was, and there's no way I could have done a startup without her, but this was really funny. She said that, and I was like, oh, thanks. Appreciate your confidence. 2009, we got another office. This was about twice as big as the office we had before. This is the whole thing. This was in the Novell campus. Sean actually helped us find this. It was great. It was exactly what we needed. Awesome internet, enough room for 5 guys to be spaced just far enough that they weren't smelling each other's BO all the time, and some, a hot chocolate machine. I mean, it was awesome. We had fun too, So 2009, we kept writing code. This is a little bit of the sad story when you ask, of those customers, how many, of those people you talk to, how many are customers. We kind of got antisocial at this point. It's not a bad story, right? I mean, we ended up in a really great spot, but if there was any part of the Instructure story that I would say didn't happen as well as I wanted it to, it would be this part, which is we did not maintain those relationships with those institutions that we talked to. We didn't keep them informed. We didn't show them mock-ups as we were going forward and get them on the phone. And it was just really unfortunate. Me and Devlin, we split up the responsibilities, and I said, look, I'll take care of engineering, write a ton of code. Devlin is taking care of business, and that maintenance of the relationships just didn't get handled very well. So it was really unfortunate. My advice is, of course, maintain those relationships. It's so much easier to keep an ongoing relationship than it is to try to reignite it later on, because these were people that were excited, right? These were people who thought this was a cool thing. One of the schools we talked to, UC Riverside, we didn't have an appointment. We showed up and we walked in and said, hey, we're here to talk to so-and-so, and he came over and he was like, oh, I forgot you guys were coming. And we said, yeah, don't worry about it, it's okay. And we went in and talked to him. He was actually on the advisory board of Blackboard, and at the end, it was interesting because he said, obviously he was on the advisory board of Blackboard. He had a lot of comments about why Blackboard was better and cooler and why we would never be able to disrupt it. But then at the end he said, you guys are the ones that are going to build the next generation of system, for sure. You guys understand this better than anybody else. So that was great data from somebody who shouldn't have been saying that in the first place. But again, we didn't maintain that relationship. We didn't keep going with them. So UC Riverside is still on Blackboard, and we'll get to them someday. So that's the sad part of the story. Don't do that. 2009. The other thing that we did in 2009, we actually brought on an initial CEO. This is part of the reason why is because we needed somebody to help out with this business development, side of things. Really great, really useful. His name was Corey. The plan was always that he would be kind of an interim CEO, which is what he was. He got us going, got us our first pilots, and really helped to get the ball rolling, just because he had a lot of contacts outside of the state of Utah. So we got our initial pilots. 2010, we ran those. 2010, we actually got our first customers as well, which was a ton of fun. BYU Hawaii was the first school to hop on board with Instructure, their distance ed program. Westminster College in Salt Lake was next, and then it just kind of slowly grew from there. Josh Coates, the guy that taught our class forever ago, I showed the slide on. We actually brought him in as the CEO. He's still our CEO. He's awesome. He's great. And he's really helped to move things to the next level. The other thing on this slide that I want to point out, other than the banana behind that guy's head, is specials is crossed out. This was something that we felt really strongly about and that we had to be really careful. Now that we had paying customers, It's so easy to let your customers drive the development of your product. It's so easy to let them say, well, we got to have this and we got to have this, and you don't have it yet. And you have this tension, right? Because these people are paying you money, right? And you want to do what they're asking you, but at the same time, sometimes they ask you for things that are super crazy and super institution or customer specific. And that's what I refer to as specials. And we decided in 2010 that we weren't going to do specials. We weren't going to say, okay, Westminster wants this weird thing, we'll build that for them, and we'll just like wrap it in some conditional statements in the code so that nobody else ever sees it. And then BYU Hawaii wants this weird thing, so we'll wrap that over here and nobody else needs to know about it. Because what happens is, as you build a product that way, it just gets grody, right? You have all these barnacles and you have to maintain them and support them, and it weighs you down. And so a lot of my time then and even now has been spent, it's very similar to that minimum viable product idea, which is just when people come to you and say, we need this thing, you have to say, okay, why? What is the root problem that you're dealing with? And is there a different way that we could solve it? And is there a more generalizable way that we could solve it? So when they come to you and say, I need to be able to spy on my students, we say, oh gosh, I don't want people to spy on their students. What are you trying to accomplish? And then it comes out that they say, well, I can't see, their student groups, and I can't get into those student groups. And we say, oh, well, geez, let's just give you access to those student groups. But that's different than spying. You don't need to spy on everything they do, but in this specific case, that makes a ton of sense, right? And so you have to start to dig in and understand those root issues that people have, and then you try to solve those. That's the responsibility of a product person, whatever kind of product they're building, right, is to understand and build the right solution rather than the one your customers are asking for. So really useful. I put fake legit at the top because we had customers and we thought we were cool, all that bag of chips, and we were getting started, but nobody had heard of us still, right? I mean, the people that were using us had heard of us, and that was about it. 2011, on the other hand, we got a lot of growth and a lot of awesome things happened. The beginning of that year is when we made our big press launch, and I'll show you guys some videos from that. Yeah, we're good on time. It was when we announced that we got the UN contract, which is why y'all use Canvas. And we also announced that we were going open source. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and if people are curious, I can talk about them afterwards. But
I'm sorry, we actually do have just like 2 minutes.
oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
So yeah, that's fine.
We went right to the top.
Sorry, I forgot. Yeah, that's right, 10 till.
And this is such a great presentation.
It's okay, we're good. If you want to see my videos, you can come afterwards and I'll show you my videos. It's okay. So 2011, we got a ton of great press, got a ton of schools on board, and we really cemented ourselves as the innovation leader in this space, which was what we were trying for from the get-go, right? This was a lot of fun. That summer, we Blackboard and Desire to Learn, who are the two big players in the space, both of them announced the next versions of their product, and they were total rip-offs of what we had already built, which was great for us. Everybody was like, oh, Instructure just got owned because Blackboard just copied them, and we're like, well, copy us all day long. Like, we'll stay ahead by 6 months, and after that happens 2 or 3 times, then we're the guys driving the market, and everybody knows that. So we were totally fine with that. 2012, that's where we are, right? We plan to keep innovating and growing and have a ton of great stuff happen. Should be a lot of fun. But it's been a great ride. We've learned a ton. And hopefully this has helped you guys kind of get a feel for how to get started, how to put together that initial pitch, and where to go from there. So any questions while we're zipping up bags and everything?